Just to make sure you're in the right session, this is BRK 162 Best Practices and what's new for managing Office 365 groups. My name is Mike McLean. I'm a program manager on the Office 365 Groups engineering team. That means I work out at our Microsoft headquarters in Redmond. I really love coming to conferences like this. I think it's an awesome opportunity to really connect with the customers and partners, hear about how you've deployed our solutions and built great things on top of our products. I love connecting with the community, so feel free to send me an email. I have my email address up here, or you can tweet me on Twitter. And for a special treat, I actually tweeted out a link to slides from this deck just before this session. So I think the conference said they'll release these in the next couple of weeks, but I want to make sure that they're in your hands because there's a lot of great links that we've included. A couple things about the logistics for today. I think we're maybe the last thing sitting between you and an awesome Gin Blossoms concert tonight. Woo! If you listen carefully, they're actually rehearsing upstairs, which is kind of cool. So we'll try to keep this to an hour, and I'll also be at the Microsoft booths in the expo hall. So if there are questions afterwards, feel free to find me down there, or you can chat with any of the product team. We can always follow up afterwards. All right, so when I talk to folks at the booth this week and over the last couple months, there's a varying degree of understanding around what Office 365 Groups is. There are some customers that have moved along and deployed it, and they're actively using groups. Other customers still have questions around, well, what is an Office 365 group? When would I use Microsoft Teams versus Yammer? And then how do I manage these groups once they start being created inside my company? So we put together this session here, and there's 4 distinct parts. First, we're going to talk a little bit about what Office 365 groups are. We'll talk about some of the new innovations that have delivered in the endpoints that create and provision Office 365 groups. We'll show a couple new features from a management perspective. Second, we'll go a little deeper into how to deploy groups from a self-service perspective and how you can manage these groups in a nice governed way. Now, for this area, just do a quick show of hands. How many folks here are already using Office 365 groups inside their company? Good. Okay. So for the recording, maybe like 85 to 90%. So keep your hand up if you deployed self-service where anybody can create a Microsoft Teams team, a planner plan, SharePoint team site. Okay. So maybe 30%. This is definitely representative of what we see out there in the marketplace. A lot of customers have experimented with groups and the applications that create groups, but they haven't reached that point of enlightenment yet where everyone in the organization can create groups at will. So we'll talk about a few features that help control and help govern that. Third, we'll talk about how to extend group collaboration outside your company. We know that collaboration isn't restricted to just the people within the 4 walls of your organization. And then last, we'll talk a little bit about how to extend group management at scale. I get a lot of questions around whether or not you can extend the group management process through things like Microsoft Graph or PowerShell. We have a couple of examples. And then we'll also touch briefly on how Microsoft manages groups in our organization. Lots of people wonder how a company with 100,000 plus people can actually deploy self-service across our entire company. So let's jump right in. So what's new with groups? Well, as noted in the keynote yesterday, a few years ago, we noticed that the landscape of teamwork was changing, right? Right now, people are working on twice as many projects. They're collaborating in different ways. If you think about how maybe you co-authored a document just a few years ago, you might have been emailing this to a set of folks, adding comments, consolidating. Now we're co-authoring in real time, right? We're moving at a much faster pace. Like I said, folks are collaborating inside and outside their company, and they really have these expectations that they can work from anywhere, right? They can work inside the company, in the office, at home, from a coffee shop, laptop, mobile phone, whatever. Third, we know that we're addressing a much more diverse workforce, right? A majority of our employees right now are millennials, and they have different expectations. They're used to being able to install whatever app they can find on the App Store to start collaborating, sending messages, and performing their teamwork. And then lastly, we've done a lot of studies, and it's shown that engaged users are much more productive, right? And these companies usually see profits of about 21% higher when their employees are engaged. That means they're engaged in their day-to-day work and the teamwork that they're focused on, and they're engaged across the company, and they feel like they can reach out and connect with people across their organization. So hearing this, you're probably wondering, okay, well, what did Microsoft do to address this? Well, with Microsoft 365, we really introduced a nice integrated solution that provides a universal toolkit that ties together a lot of the services that we provision in Office 365. In the old days, your users might come to you and say, hey, I really need a SharePoint site to store the documents that my team needs to work on. Great, so you provision the SharePoint site. A couple weeks later, they come back. Hey, I really need a distribution list so I can email that same set of people. Okay, great, let's go provision that, right? And it got even more complicated with services like Microsoft Project and other things. So what we did with Microsoft 365 was really try to provide a nice integrated solution that simplifies that IT management. And then on top of that, we want to provide a lot of insights and analytics. So you really have the tools that put you in the driver's seat to really understand how your employees are using these connected services across Microsoft 365. So, okay, you're probably thinking, I get it. So how does this fit into teamwork? Well, what it comes down to is there's a lot of different ways that people collaborate, right? How many people have seen this slide before? Okay, good number of folks. So we won't spend a whole lot of time on this. On the right, we have Yammer, right? A lot of folks ask me, how can Yammer bring value to my organization? Well, Yammer is really for addressing large communities across your company, right? So this might be a set of professionals that all have the same interests: marketing, finance, dog lovers, Gin Blossoms fans, whatever you want, right? These are people, you might not even know their name, okay? But you're gonna come to these communities, you might post a video, you might post a picture, get some feedback, or try to find a subject matter expert, right? So Yammer is a really, has a lot of strength in the community aspect of pulling a company together. Then on the left, you have Microsoft Teams, right? So when you're executing day to day and you want to work rapidly, Microsoft Teams is a perfect fit. These are the people that you might even be sitting with, right? There might be people that you're co-authoring documents with. There might be people that I worked with to prepare to come to this conference. It might be a set of folks inside my company and a couple that we pulled from a vendor or a contractor. And so this is generally referred to as the inner loop, because these are people that I'm working with regularly. On the bottom, of course, we have email. This is the tried and true method for communicating. Believe it or not, anytime you write an email and you put someone on the to line, you're collaborating with them. It's probably the easiest way to collaborate with somebody outside your company, because all you do is drop their email address in the to line, right? Think about it. So what Office 365 Groups has done is really tie all these experiences together. And Office 365 Groups can be defined as the foundational membership service that drives all teamwork across Microsoft 365. Okay, so I'll repeat that. Office 365 Groups is the foundational membership service that drives all teamwork across Microsoft 365. All right? It's built on top of Azure Active Directory, which is the directory that houses all of your users and your groups inside your company. So every time you onboard a new user, a new employee, right, they're creating an entry in your directory. Anytime you are creating a Microsoft Teams team, a SharePoint Teams site, a planner plan, a group in Outlook, you're creating an Office 365 group under the covers in that directory, okay? So all of those connected services are now built on top of Office 365 Groups. Since it's a single membership service, when you add a user inside of Outlook, they now get access to those files in SharePoint with the SharePoint site that's connected to that group. So it's been a great way to tie together all these services so that when you create that group in Outlook, you automatically get that SharePoint site, and you automatically get that calendar, right? And you can get that planner plan. It's extensible, so we do expose these entities in Microsoft Graph, which is great, so you can build on top of that. And then you can also automate some of these processes using technologies like PowerShell. So what have we done recently? So there's been a whole host of innovations across the suite. So people always ask, hey, what's new? How are you investing in the platform? And here's just a quick sample of some of the things that we've shipped recently, right? So on the SharePoint side, you've probably seen this week, you can create an Office 365 group from an existing SharePoint team site. You can actually take those team sites that you've upgraded to be modern sites and now use that as the basis for your group. On the Outlook side, we've upgraded the files view that you see right there in Outlook So as you're emailing documents and uploading documents to SharePoint, you have access to those at your fingertips inside Outlook, and it's the same experience that you have in SharePoint. Microsoft Teams has released support for guest access, dynamic membership, and a whole host of other features that you've probably seen announced. When you look at Yammer, there's really been a ton of investment in things like live events that connect Stream with Yammer across the suite. And today, actually, Vishal was demoing Stream, and he pointed out the fact that since it's all based on Office 365 groups, everyone who had access to the video and Stream now has access in SharePoint. So when you go down this list, we've got Stream, Planner, there's new web parts, schedule views being shipped by Microsoft Planner. In the past year, there's new integrations that have shipped to Office 365 groups as well. Microsoft Forms was brand new. Previously, if you created a form and you sent out a survey and you collected these results, you were the only person that had access to it. So now that they've tied into Office 365 groups, if I go on a vacation and the results come in, other folks on my team can start processing them and looking at the results of my form survey. And then lastly, Microsoft Project just released a brand new integration for Project Roadmap, which is pretty cool. So there's been a lot of innovation across the suite, and there's definitely more to come. So let me hop in and show you a quick demo of a couple of the features that I just mentioned. So here, I'm actually going to start this demo inside Yammer. Like I said, there's been a lot of innovation to connect Yammer to Office 365 groups over the last couple of years. And so now, when I'm in my Yammer feed here, previously, if I uploaded a file into my Yammer feed, it would be stored only in the Yammer service, right? Because it wasn't connected to SharePoint or Office 365 groups. So now, if I click Upload, and let's say I select my launch plan that I want to upload to my Yammer feed, and I say, here is the launch plan, and I post this into Yammer, what's happening is that since this is connected to Office 365 groups, I have a SharePoint document library right here in Yammer. I can drill in through apps, and then I have a folder here called Yammer. When I jump into Yammer, now I've got that file right here in SharePoint. So this is huge because now it's covered by all the policies that I put in place with SharePoint. It's covered by all my document retention lifecycle that I put in place. And most importantly, it's covered by Microsoft Search. So all my documents are searchable. Right? So this has been a great innovation on the Yammer side because now they've connected all their file repository to SharePoint. So sticking with SharePoint just for a minute, if I jump over to Outlook, here I have a group that I'm using in Outlook. This is my product launch event. And like I mentioned, we've had the files view in Outlook. However, it was just a straight list of documents that were emailed or uploaded to the group. What we've done is completely overhaul this experience. So as a group owner or group member, I'm actually now looking at the same exact file control that we're using in SharePoint. So we've pulled in this native control, and when you compare the look and feel, I've got my name, modified by, etc. Now we've got the same thing right here in Outlook. So it's nice that my users only have one experience that they need to learn. And what's great is that this has allowed us to deliver probably the #1 most requested feature in this files experience, which was the ability to show the folder list that's in SharePoint, and then the ability to actually create new folders. So let's say I have a new Gin Blossoms folder here, and I want to drill into this folder. I can actually upload a document right here from within Outlook. So I can pull that same file in, upload this into Outlook, and then now I've got like the toast notifications, the uploading pane, and everything else that SharePoint ships. So this is pretty cool, and it's really gone a long way to driving coherence across the suite by bringing SharePoint together with some of these Outlook experiences. So if you step back and kind of look at the Outlook experience as a whole, we've really updated the look and feel of the conversation feed. The left-hand navigation pane is much more responsive. And it's allowed us to bring things like search front and center. So here, if I'm looking for, let's say, a particular user, I've got this at my fingertips, or a particular term across the suite. This is very similar to what Karim showed in the demo yesterday at the keynote, right? So we're trying to bring that search right to the center of SharePoint, Outlook, and a lot of the other experiences. So when you come to the group here, one of the most common things is to look at the list of members that are part of this group, right? And so if I open up my group card here, what I've got is, let me see, hold on. Let me just refresh this. There's a couple different levels of the group card, and here we go. Okay, and so what we've done is really give the group card a complete overhaul, right? So one of the most common actions when you come into the group card is to look at the list of members. And so now what we've done is really enhance this so you've got not only the list of members, but you have their job title, their role, and I can change this or remove these users from my group right here inside this group card. I've got access to recent emails that have been sent to this group. I've got access to recent files that have been uploaded. You can see I've already got access to the 2 Word documents that we uploaded. And if I click About, I've got access to the email address that's used to this group. If I need to address this group, I can copy this to the clipboard pretty quickly. And then at the bottom, I have a link to all the related services. So this is great and really gives my users one place to come in and access all the connected services to my Office 365 group. What we recently shipped in the last couple months was search right from within this group card. So if I need to search for a user like Megan, I can just type in her name and she'll be pulled up right here in my list. This is great because as your groups grow, it becomes very difficult to scroll through as you're trying to manage your list of users. So this is the feature that's improved the manageability. If you're a group owner, you need to come in here and find someone to either add, remove, or modify. So we know that group card is great and these features are awesome, but we really needed to provide more from a group management perspective, which is why we introduced for the first time our Groups Hub. So now inside Outlook, if I click my People link at the bottom of the left-hand navigation, I can actually see both my groups and my contacts here in my left-hand side. I can pretty easily filter on either the groups of which I'm a member or the groups of which I'm an owner. So when I click Owner, now I can quickly see any of the groups that need action. Previously, let's say a group was going to expire and we had like 4 owners. Each of us would receive an email, and then it'd be really tough for me to understand if Fred already renewed the group and if I need to take action, or if Bob approved a membership request, and then I'd probably just be going through the same motions. So now I can come in and see, okay, this group expires in a little over 2 weeks. I have the option to renew it. I'm not going to renew it because we're going to look at expiry a little bit later in the demo. But if I wanted to, I could. And down here, I can also see that I've got a couple different pending requests for my group. So as a group owner, I can come in, I can see who wants to join my group, and I can approve those requests. So this Groups Hub is really going a long way towards providing a nice unified view for my group owners, which is a slightly different persona from your IT admins or your global admins. Great. So just to kind of recap what we saw there, we took a look at our updated file upload experience in Yammer. Hold on. If it's okay, I'm just going to pause those for a sec due to bandwidth. So we took a look at the updated file upload experience in Yammer. That's now connected to SharePoint, which means all your files are covered by everything that you've configured in SharePoint. We took a look at the updated files experience in Outlook, right? And we saw that we've brought search front and center, updated group card, and we also looked at things like the brand new Groups Hub that allows you to manage owners and members. So how do you think about that? Round of applause for the Outlook and SharePoint folks who are watching right now. All right, so that's great, and those are some features that kind of put some control into the hands of the group owner and some of the users that are trying to manage their groups. But what about like rolling out and self-service, right? So from the self-service perspective, it really comes down to 2 options. One is there is a class of customers that enable group creation for all users in their company, right? This really puts group creation in the hands of the most individuals. In this scenario, yes, you'll probably have the largest number of groups created, but at the same time, you also have the largest chance of giving your users a tool with which they can satisfactorily complete their tasks. Right? If they can't get access to a tool and create groups or channels or things that they need to communicate, they're going to go find it somewhere else. Right? This is the risk of shadow IT. So in this scenario, this is great for divisions, small companies, but believe it or not, I've actually talked to a couple of customers that had 20 or 30,000 employees, and they just went full steam ahead with Microsoft Teams. Reason being, a lot of these users already had a competitor product, and they're like, hey, they can go get the competitor product almost easier than they can something connected to the Office 365 suite. So they said, let's go. Let's give them Microsoft Teams. They enabled it for everyone, and now they're off to the races, right? So this is kind of the first approach, which is enabling for all users. The second approach is to enable for a subset of users. So very frequently I get the question, hey Mike, is there a way you can enable group creation for just 1,000 people or 100 people in my company? Yes, you can. You can actually specify a security group in the configuration and say only users inside the security group can create Office 365 groups. This is fine if you want to do a pilot and then maybe gradually extend this to other users in your company. But we usually recommend progressively expanding that self-service so you get this into the hands of more users, right? When you look at the different features that are available for managing groups, I mean, it's a pretty long stack, and we're adding to this like every quarter. Over the past couple of years, we enabled soft delete and restore. So if you accidentally delete a group, you can actually recover this without getting on the phone and calling Microsoft. We have creation permissions, right, that I talked about. There's more we're building into the information protection suite to actually take advantage of those labels, right? Now, I've talked about that in the keynote yesterday. So if you define those labels and you want to connect like behaviors, you can do that. We'll talk about that later in the roadmap. But for today, we'll focus on two features. The first one is naming policy, which just went to general availability a little over 4 weeks ago. So we've had this in preview for a while, but we're really excited to hit GA. And the second is expiration policy, because this kind of helps control the life cycle of the groups inside your tenant. So the first one, naming policy, has two aspects to it. It applies to all apps that create Office 365 groups. And the two aspects are, one, there is a prefix and suffix that you can define if you want to apply this to your group names. And two, you can provide a list of blocked words. So you can kind of get like creative on the blocked words part. I had somebody ask me like, hey, Mike, do you have a list of profane terms that I can start with? And I'm like, oh, I think you can probably put that together with like anybody, 12 years old and up. But this could include like a list of profane terms. You could put in Satya Nadella if you don't want someone to create a group with your CEO's name and start spoofing their email. But this custom blocked word will be prevented from being used in any group names. The prefix and suffix can be either a fixed string, or it can dynamically pull from one of the out-of-the-box attributes in Azure Active Directory. So we were just talking about this before the session. If you want to dynamically pull in the department of a user or their country or their city, you can do that. The guidance here is to use short strings as a suffix or a prefix because they end up showing on the dialog when you're creating that group and in some of the user experiences. I think there is an advantage in using attributes, right? Because you can say, hey, these are the marketing groups, these are the finance groups, and some customers just want to group all the groups together in Azure Active Directory, right? So that they can just prefix them all with G or GRP or something like that. So it's easier to manage. The second feature I mentioned was group expiry policy. A lot of customers have the question, hey, how can I ensure that my directory is staying clean? After unleashing groups, all of a sudden they've got a couple thousand and they kind of want to like Marie Kondo their directory. So you can put together an expiry policy that will actually require your group owners to renew a group like every 6 months or every year and validate that they're still using it. This is something we did inside Microsoft. This can be turned on for specific groups if you don't want to apply it to all groups inside your tenant. And some of the guidance here is to pilot it with a small set of groups initially so you can understand that workflow, and then gradually extend this to more groups inside your company. It's also great to communicate to your users that, hey, we're going to put this policy in place, right? Because they're going to start receiving emails about renewing the groups, and they'll have to take some action. It's also recommended to have a multi-owner policy in this case, because sometimes if somebody is on vacation, maternal, parental leave, out of the country, they might not respond to those renewal emails, and that's something we did at Microsoft too. I can talk more about that later. And then lastly, there is a way to configure this policy so you can send a notification for any ownerless groups as well. So if your owner just happened to leave the company, you can have a catch-all there for any groups that didn't have owners. We'll take a look at that in a sec. So what are some innovations that we've seen across the administration space? I'll go ahead and build this out. So we talked about connecting existing SharePoint sites. There has been a Power BI content pack that was released that shows a lot of groups analytics features, which is great. In the past year, we've shipped the ability to update the email addresses that are used for an Office 365 group. So previously, if you change that address, it kind of retained the old one as like a backup. And so now you can completely release that if you want to reuse that somewhere else. You can also use a dot in your group alias, things like that. Those are a little more technical features like the proxy address, but they were highly requested from our customers. And then you'll probably see that there's been a complete overhaul of the SharePoint Admin Center. And so there's a lot more functionality in there related to groups, where you can see which groups are connected to hub sites, which sites are connected to Office 365 groups, and et cetera. From a governance perspective, like I mentioned, naming policy has hit general availability. And I'm really happy to announce that as of last week, the only way to configure that was through PowerShell, right? Which is something that a lot of admins are familiar with, but it's a little more technical. And so as of last week, we've actually released a user experience in the AED portal where you can actually set that prefix and suffix and upload a file with your blocked words. So that's pretty cool and kind of goes a step towards providing a better experience in terms of setting that feature. We've got more endpoint supporting naming policies like Yammer and Outlook Mobile, since you can create groups from your phone. And then there's been more work around Azure B2B guest support for external guests. There's been a lot of progress on multi-geo as well. So now if you have a tenant that spans multiple geographies, when you create an Office 365 group, it'll actually be homed in the region in which that user lives. So this is huge because previously it was all based on the primary tenant. So let's take a look at a couple of these features. All right. So I mentioned that these are generally configured inside Azure Active Directory. So here I'm in Azure Active Directory, and if you haven't used this before, this is accessible via portal.azure.com. And so when I come in here, I drill into my Azure Active Directory, and on the left side, I have an option for groups. And here, there's my entire list of groups here. This includes everything, all my distribution lists that are just used for email, my new Office groups, even some older security groups. But on the left-hand side, I have expiration, and I have naming policy preview. So we'll take a look at expiry first. In this dialog, there's a few different options. Out of the box, I can set an expiry time frame, like I said, for 6 months or 1 year. I can also set a custom period starting with 31 days. So when I set this, my group owners will start receiving an email 30 days before the group expires. So they'll receive that first email, and then they'll receive another email 15 days, and then they'll receive another email 1 day before the group is actually deleted. From that point, they'll still have 30 days to recover that group if they missed it and it got deleted. But we try to make sure that they have at least 3 chances, right? Coming down the list here, this is the field I mentioned earlier around ownerless groups. So here's where I can put in an email address where I want any notifications delivered for any groups that don't have owners. A best practice that we see a lot of our customers implement is to actually create another Office 365 group inside which they can add all of their admins. That way, for any group that doesn't have owners, any of your admins can pick that up and handle it, right? So here I actually put in the email address to an ownerless groups group, so they'll receive all the emails for any of those orphan groups. So coming down, this was the setting I mentioned around enabling expiry for either all groups in the tenant or just selected groups or none. So like I said, I could turn this on for everyone. In this case, I just have a select few. So these are the 3 primary settings you can configure from an expiry perspective. If I want to add another group in here, I can hit select groups. Let's say I want to pull up my marketing group. I can just add this to the list, hit select, and then when I hit save, now it's going to update my lifecycle settings, and it's going to be part of this policy from this point forward. Okay. So when the email is sent to my group owners, it looks something like this. Let me flip over to my other folder, and I'll give you a quick sample. So here's an email that was sent to a group owner, right? It says the group's going to expire. there's a few pieces of information that we include for the group owner. We include the project name, of course, and then we include a snapshot of the group members. So I see how many people are there. As a group owner, it helps me assess, is it still widely used? Have people abandoned this group or not? I even get their nice pictures here. And at the bottom, I've got a list of connected resources. If I want, I can go out and I can check to see if there's been conversations, files. Maybe I just want to move these files somewhere else and delete the group. So that's fine. So then if I click renew the group, then my group is renewed and everything is back to normal. So that's a quick overview of group expiry. Like I mentioned, most of these settings are configured using PowerShell. So what I'm going to do here is just give you a quick peek at some of the other settings that we can set. Let me log in. So you don't need to remember any of the syntax here or anything I'm executing. This is all documented online, and I have a link in the PowerPoint deck. But since Office 365 groups are built on Azure Active Directory, we just connect over here to Azure AD and then return the Azure AD directory settings, right, for Office 365 groups. And then down here, you can see the full list of settings that we have access to. And we're not going to demo all these, but the custom block words have been configured. So you see I've got this nice list of things here that are prevented. And then I've got a set of classifications that have been specified, which means every time my users create a group, they actually have to select whether it's highly confidential or just general business. Right? Then when I move down here, you can actually see that I have a prefix and suffix applied. And here I've got a hard-coded string. And here with these brackets, I'm using department. So this is an example of how to set a dynamic attribute that you want to pull in. So the middle is just my group name placeholder. Right? So I've got a prefix, group name, and a suffix. Coming down, I've got my security group that I mentioned earlier. So here I've specified a security group for only a few users that can create groups. And then down here, I've got a usage guidelines URL that can point anywhere in my company, right? If I want to provide some guidance on how people use groups. So once I set these, my users will come out here and if I show you this user named Alex, he belongs to the marketing department, right? So as an admin, I've created this user in my directory. They're part of the marketing department. And when he comes in here into Microsoft Teams, as you can see on the right-hand side, this is Alex Wilbur. When he comes into Teams and tries to create a new team, I'll just build one from scratch. Private, no big deal. Let's just call this like SPC19, hi everyone. You'll see my prefix is being applied here like real time, as well as that department that's dynamically being pulled from Azure AD. Pretty cool. All right, so that's an example of that prefix and suffix. And then if I jump into Yammer, just to give you another example here, Yammer does kind of the same thing. They show you prefix right here, suffix at the end. So as a user, you have an idea of what that group name is going to look like. Okay, great. So just to recap, what we looked at was how to apply the group expiry policy, right? How to configure that, kind of what that email looks like when you renew that group, how the variety of settings available through PowerShell for Office 365 groups, and then we showed how the prefix and suffix actually look, right, when you try to create that group. The last thing I was going to show as a special treat is if you jump down here to this naming policy, this is the new user experience that shipped last week to preview. So this is available for you to check out in your tenant. If I zoom in, you can see that as a user, I can actually download the current list that's inside this tenant, which is pretty cool. And then I can also upload a list here as a CSV file, or on the tab right next to it, here's where I can actually define that prefix through a UI without having to log into PowerShell. I've got my prefix here and my suffix. I can even delete this, or I can adjust this if I like. So wanted to give you a quick peek into what just shipped in preview. All right, so how do you like that? Awesome. All right, so moving right along, let's talk about collaborating with external guests outside of your company, right? When we shipped Office 365 groups, we really wanted to provide an easy way to pull people in if they're outside of your tenant, right? Like I said, almost every project I work on at Microsoft has a designer who's working for another vendor, a consultant. When we were planning for this conference here, right, we were uploading decks, coordinating with events people. And so we wanted a real easy way to pull those users in, which is why we ship guest access. You literally only need their email address to add a user to a group. When you go into Outlook or you go into the other experiences, you can just type in their email address and add that user as a member of your Office 365 group. This is built on top of the Azure Active Directory B2B platform, right? And so when that email address is added as a member, they're inserted as a user inside your Azure Active Directory. So this means that as a user, you can see who invited them. You can audit which services they have access to, when they've tried to access those services. You can block them if you want to. And then now you can actually create new workflows around reattesting that these guests should still have access to your tenant. You can allow and block certain domains. So when you talk about best practices, there are some customers that block certain domains from key competitors, or you can specify a whitelist if there's only certain domains that you want to allow. Here on the right side, I've got a set of links around how you can go configure guest access in Office 365 groups if you want to tweak some of those settings. When you kind of look at the different at the scale of how you enable guest access, there is a role that you can assign to users. So if you don't want to open it up to everyone in your tenant, you can assign a guest inviter role to just certain people, and then only those people can invite individuals outside your company. This still, of course, extends that collaboration to people outside your organization, but the reach is a little bit lower since only a few people can actually execute that function. The second stage of reach is to enable it for more individuals, but just restrict certain domains, right? So you can kind of throttle that back a little bit. And then the last aspect is to just enable this for all users to invite guests, and then just disable guest access at the individual group level. So here we've seen some best practices where customers will run jobs that look for any groups that are flagged as highly confidential, and then just disable guest access for those groups. Right? This allows them to collaborate with people outside the company in the majority of their groups, except for those few like high-profile NDA groups in which they don't want to share any content. So within the past year, there's a new feature that we shipped called guest access reviews. Has anybody heard of this? Maybe, okay, one person. Awesome. Great. 2, 3, 4. Okay, more people. Well, now everybody can raise their hand because you've heard it. But guest access reviews are a way to set up a regular review process where your group owners have to reattest that someone should still be a guest in that group. The feedback we got from customers was, hey, I'm okay letting people invite guests in, but I don't want them to be guests forever, right? Every 6 months, let's just check and see if they should still have access to this content or not. So what you can do here is create an access review policy. If that user is rejected, then they'll be removed from that group, and they immediately lose access to all of those resources. So let's take a look at a quick demo of this. All right, so here in again, Azure Active Directory. On the right-hand side, there's a link called Identity Governance. And inside here, there's a few different features, right? So right in the middle, I have access reviews. So this is where I create my access review, right? This is kind of what I was talking about. But before I create this access review, I think what I'm going to do is show you how we actually add a guest user. That kind of makes sense. So here, I'm going to click my members. And when I click Add Members, my Add Member pane comes up. And so when I type michaeltmclean01@gmail.com, here I can add a user. And you might notice I'm using a Gmail address, right? So this isn't even a Microsoft property. And when I click Add, this user is now added as a guest inside of my group. So let me see if my group list has refreshed yet. Let's see. Cool, there he is. So here's my guest user, and you might notice a couple things. One, this user is flagged as a guest here, so when my group members and my group owners are looking at the list, they know, oh, there's somebody outside the company that's part of this. And now this group is flagged as being a private group with guests, okay? So I've got that up here at the top. When I come over here to Azure Active Directory, like I said, they're going to be a user inside my directory, and now I can start creating an access review. So I'm going to click New Access Review, and we'll call this SPC19 Marketing Review, because I want to create an access review for my marketing group. When I scroll down, we'll say this is going to be a one-time review, and this will, let's see, this will be a review for guest users only, and then I'm going to add my marketing group. Okay. So I've got my marketing group. We're going to add this in, and it's just telling me that there's already a review on this group, and that's totally fine. So I hit save, and you'll see this toast up here. Now it's spinning up this marketing access review, right? So it's creating all the link controls that are needed for this group. So let's refresh this and see if this is active yet. Go inside my access reviews. And let's see, not started yet. Okay, cool. So you can see now it's starting, which is good. So pretty soon, I think it'll flip to active. And then what it'll do is it'll kick out an email to my group owner for the marketing group. Okay, good. All right, so let's flip over here. Okay, awesome. So now I've got an email that says, hey, group owner, you need to review my SPC19 marketing group, right? So I'm going to go ahead and start that review. So when I click start, this is going to bring me into the Azure Active Directory review experience. And what's funny is the access review policy is actually trying to be smart. So you'll notice here there's one user who is a Gmail user, and then it's noticing that they haven't signed in the last 30 days. Okay, so they're actually recommending that I deny this person because they're saying, hey, they haven't used it. Why should we renew them? But I'm going to say, Tony is a good guy. I know who he is. Approved. So I'm going to keep him in the group, right? So now when I click save, my access review is done. Tony's approved, and now he's still a member of my Office 365 group. So if I have multiple users, obviously I'd go through this process for all these external users. But now there's a record that I've actually gone through, and I've audited this external user inside my Office 365 group, and I verified that they should still have access to all that content. So what do you think about that? Pretty cool? All right. It is a part of the, that's a good question. So the question was, is access reviews available for all like plans? Is that what we said? It's an Azure AD Premium feature. So you do have to have Azure AD Premium since it's some added functionality on top of that. Good question. I have to double check on that. It might be P2. Yeah. So I'll take more questions as soon as we're done, if that's okay, because we just have one more section. All right, so the last section here, what are some best practices with managing Office 365 groups, right? So we looked at some expiry, lifecycle, some naming policy scenarios, guest access scenarios, as well as some stuff for group owners. There's another feature called usage guidelines, where inside your organization, you can create a page that says, hey, this is how we use Yammer groups. This is how we use Teams groups. This is how we use Outlook. You can actually embed that URL just in one place in the Azure Active Directory settings, and then it'll show up in all of the group creation dialogues in Outlook and Yammer, et cetera. So we usually recommend using this. And then there's a couple of other features as well around retention policies and labels. So as you look into more of the Microsoft 365 suite, you'll see that not only now can you define these static labels inside Azure Active Directory of general or like low, medium, high. But if you've got the information protection suite, you can actually define your labels there now. And what that means is if your group is created and someone selects, let's say, highly confidential from the information protection suite, you can now drive behaviors like make sure that group must be private, or you can only see the content if you're a member. Additionally, you could flag it to say that you're not allowed to invite external guests. Okay, so labels help you classify groups inside your organization, and a lot of these policies are super powerful. So I've got some more links here on the deck. There's a couple of samples here that reflect a couple of jobs that we run inside Microsoft. This isn't the exact code, but this helps. This is one way to audit ownerless groups. So we actually have jobs we run where we detect any groups that don't have an owner, and then we can kick out an email to the admin to let them know. So you can extend group management using things like PowerShell, right, which is a scripting language that's relatively easy to pick up. It's not quite as in-depth as coding with like Microsoft Graph, but this allows you to create jobs that you can schedule overnight to look for things like ownerless groups. If you can pull ownerless groups, then the next step would be to possibly look at groups that don't have classifications assigned to them. And then you can do things like look at a combination where perhaps you've got a highly confidential group that's also public, right? So if you can detect those and flag those, then you can actually run jobs to update that overnight, notify the group owner, maybe just give them an indication that this is out of policy. A lot of this is really up to your interpretation inside your company and how you want to handle it. But these are actually things that we do at Microsoft. So for example, we'll actually run this job, detect this conflict, and then update these groups to make them private if they don't meet those standards. So then the last thing I'll mention is that we do expose all of the group entities through Microsoft Graph, and we'll see an example of this in a minute. But this means that you can build apps and solutions like in SharePoint on top of groups. An example might be building a custom workflow that we'll see in a minute. Here you can actually provision and create groups from SharePoint, from Microsoft Flow, from a lot of different entry points. So if you want to capture additional information, that's one way to do it. An example here might be if you want your users to submit a request for a group and then you want to understand why they're going to use this group and actually require a justification, you could create your own page that then calls out to the create group API and then provision that group behind the scenes. So we've got a quick demo that runs through this. And if I start here in SharePoint, what we have here is a SharePoint task list. Right? And so this demo is kind of what I just described, where we wanted to create a separate entry point where you can capture the indication somebody wants to create an Office 365 group. And then they'll submit a request through here. And then using Microsoft Flow, we'll actually leverage the Microsoft Graph APIs to then go fire an email to the user's manager, have them approve it, and then we'll go provision that Office 365 group for them. The one interesting thing we'll do here is we'll enable this group for Microsoft Teams, like all in one step, which is pretty neat. So here, like I said, I have a SharePoint task list. I'm going to click New, and we'll say this is Mike, SPC19 marketing group. And let's say I want a public group for my marketing team. Within this form that was created in task list, I'm capturing some additional information, and I'm going to indicate that I want this enabled for Microsoft Teams by default. Okay, so I filled out the required fields. We'll keep it simple. Now when I click Save, what I'll do is I'll select this task list row, and at the top I have a flow option here that we've enabled, and it's called New Request Manager Approval. So we'll kick this off, and then what we'll do here is we'll capture kind of the the justification. So this is for our marketing group. Please approve. Great. And then we'll click Run Flow. Okay, so what's happening now is the flow is kicked off, right? And so there's going to be an email that's sent to my manager. My manager is Adele. Let's see, where did Adele go? Let's see, this is Alex. Oh wait, hold on. Okay. All right, so we'll give. Let's see, hold Okay, great. So here's Adele. So this is Adele, who's the manager of the user, right? And so Adele received this email, and Adele has to approve the request for this group. So Adele's going to say approved and submit this. So this is actually an actionable email. And so she can reply in line, which is pretty neat. She doesn't need to leave the context of her email. So in this case, she's received the email, she's approved it. She didn't have to go log in somewhere else or perform some other action, which is super powerful. So coming back to my user here, let's take a look at the flow that's running. So here is my Microsoft Flow Manager. And again, there were a couple of other sessions on Flow this week, so don't worry too much about how to create this or access it. But if I jump in here, let's see, it looks like this succeeded. So this flow actually has a variety of steps, right? If you think about what happened is it pulled the information from that SharePoint task list, it looked up the manager right here in this get manager call, and then it started this approval process over here on the right-hand side. You can see who it sent to approve. And then the last thing it did is it came back here and it made an update to my SPC marketing entry in my SharePoint task list, right? So if I come over here to SharePoint and I refresh this, we should see that this was approved. So this kind of demonstrates, receiving that request and then writing that status back to the SharePoint task list, which could notify my end user. And then if I scroll down in Microsoft Teams here, looks like we've already got this provision, which is totally awesome. So right now I've got a group that was created for my user, and it was provisioned. We enabled this for Microsoft Teams. It's already shown up in my left-hand navigation. You can see I've been added as a user. Pretty cool? All right. That's always a really fun demo when it works. There's a lot of moving parts there. So just to recap, right? When you think about the user journey, we created this central part, the central portal where they could request this Office 365 group because they want to collab in Teams. But as a company, maybe we wanted some additional information. Then we fired off that request. We got an approval through email, which was really neat. Sent that back. Flow picked it up, updated SharePoint task list, and then we created the Office 365 group. That solution there is actually open source. One of our partners helped us build it, Martina Grom with At Work, and the link to that is here in the deck, so you're more than welcome to download it and play with it. Another part of that governance toolkit that we call it is this type of a dashboard that was built in SharePoint. So you can see how you can create really unique visualizations that can show you like how many groups, maybe you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 owners. This is fully interactive, so as you click parts of the pie, right, it'll show you the actual list of groups on the right-hand side. But this is a nice way to kind of see like a snapshot of the groups across your org and how they're being used. All right, so last part here around managing at scale, and then we'll take a quick look at the roadmap. How does Microsoft IT manage groups? So I get this question all the time. With 100,000 plus employees, we have enabled self-service. Any Microsoft full-time employee can go out and create an Office 365 group. We have limited this to full-time employees. As a company, we made the decision that we want full-time employees to be responsible for the content that's created and managed inside these groups. That's why we don't allow contractors, vendors, or people outside Microsoft to create these groups. So they must be created by employees, and they must have owners that are employees. We have implemented naming policy to block certain words. We have not implemented the prefix and suffix. We're still looking at that. And we have turned on group expiry. So we have a 180-day life cycle within which groups need to be renewed. So it was great deploying this inside Microsoft because we got to work out a lot of the kinks through that process. But it works pretty well. We have usage guidelines, and they're very generic, right? Be polite in terms of your experience with these groups. Be inclusive. Of course, there's always processes to handle conversations or et cetera if they come up. From a classification perspective, we do require every group creator to indicate if it's low, medium, high, right? In terms of how confidential the content is. And then if it's high, we have other processes that go in place to then filter that through the documents that are created and are part of that group. And I already talked to this a little bit, but we have custom jobs that run every day to look at inconsistencies and classification and privacy settings and things like that. So that's kind of an overview of the best practices that we've implemented. So the last area I wanted to touch on is our roadmap, right? So people are always asking like, hey, what's next? Okay, this is awesome. So we saw how groups expiry can work, but that was really version 1, the groups expiry. Version 2 is going to look more closely at those active groups that are constantly being used, and it's going to automatically renew them. I heard somebody clap already. And the great news is we're well underway with this piece of functionality. And the theory here is that if a group is healthy and people are editing documents and they're sending emails and they're chatting in Teams, there's really no reason to delete or deprovision this group. So here, there are certain signals that we're going to feed into our model to understand if the group is seeing activity, and then we'll automatically renew it. So we're launching this into private preview pretty soon. So we'll be looking for feedback on the signals and the model, of course, and how we can tweak it. The second thing we're looking at are in-app expiry notifications. So you might have noticed that Teams has already got a head start in this area. So if you've turned on expiry for certain groups that are driving Teams, you'll actually see an indicator for those teams if it's about to expire. It's a little icon that shows up in the team name. There's more apps in which we'd like to surface that experience. If you're primarily using that group in Yammer, you might not be reading email as often as someone who's really deep in Outlook groups. So what we're looking at here is if we can deliver that in-app expiry notification in apps like Yammer or even Planner or Stream. Next, we're working really hard on a group's admin role. Today, to modify some of the metadata around the group, like renew it if it's expiring or modify membership, you have to either be a group owner of that group or you have to be a tenant admin, right, which gives you, God access to your entire tenant. So the group's admin role will be kind of a layer in the middle where you can assign this role to someone, and they'll have the ability. I heard another another round of applause. Woo! Where they can come in and perform some of those actions without actually having to be added as an owner of that group. All right, because at the end of the day, you have a safer tenant if you have fewer numbers of tenant admins. Okay. The next thing is guest access with one-time passcode. This shipped to preview already. You can go out and search and look it up on docs.microsoft.com. This is a secure way to invite guests and make sure that they have to confirm that one-time passcode before they get into the system. And then kind of moving along, we already talked about classification and the labels quite a bit, but that's been a pretty big initiative launching a preview right now. We saw group card member search work, so that was brand new since Ignite. And then group calendar invites just launched to general availability. What this means is that previously, if you scheduled a meeting on the group calendar, there's a high chance that you might spam everybody in that group with that meeting request. Now you'll actually be able to make the group an owner of that calendar invite, but only invite selected people. Okay, so that means that, okay, you can go ahead and clap, it's fine. So what this means is that let's say you have like an engineering daily scrum group, right? If the membership is kind of transient, people are coming out, that meeting request can continue to be owned by the group, and then you can also just invite specific people if you want to pull in your manager or director or things like that. But someone else could always come in and modify that meeting request. Then we've got a bunch of improvements in the admin center. Microsoft Admin Center has done a great job of trying to surface more functionality that can be modified around groups. And kind of rolling into the next item, previously, if you wanted to modify any of those mail-related properties that were mastered in the Exchange service, you actually needed an Exchange license, which was kind of cumbersome. So now we're actually providing the ability to modify those settings without requiring a license be assigned to that person. So this is pretty big, especially if you're a smaller company and you've got a limited number of licenses. You don't want to necessarily burn an Exchange license on someone who's just coming in there to tweak properties. Then last, there's been a lot of enhancements around Outlook actionable messages, and you'll probably be happy to see a bunch of great stuff rolling out on the Outlook desktop, including drag and drop to folders. So this will be huge. You'll actually be able to drag messages around inside the Outlook desktop client. So great. So just to kind of like recap everything that we covered today, we really tried to make sure you got your money's worth. We started with a set of enhancements that help outline some best practices for group owners, right? People that are managing that group through Outlook, Teams, or Yammer. Then we looked at self-service governance with expiry naming policy, took a look at external users and how we can implement controls around that. And then lastly, talked about best practices for managing groups at scale. So I'll leave you with a few links here. I've got a link to these slides. So if you want to research all the information that I linked to, all the help articles and everything, feel free to download them. We've got documentation here. If you have feedback, user voice is a great way to deliver that to us. So I have a link here. You can vote on features there. We scan that every week, and that's really great help in terms of prioritizing our backlog. I've got a link here to Fast Track, which is also super useful in terms of getting started quickly, along with Microsoft Graph, our Microsoft release roadmap, where everything I've discussed today is published publicly. And then I've got the governance toolkit link right here as well. So you guys have been an awesome audience considering it's like 5 o'clock. So, round of applause for you. Feel free to hit me up with any questions, and please fill out your session evals because we're always looking for great feedback to incorporate that in our content. But have an awesome show tonight. Thanks.